Greetings. This is going to be a kind of an intro rules overview to the game that was in Strategy and Tactics 333. Came out I think the beginning of this year. I'd have to check the dates, but a recent one. I think they're second to newest Strategy and Tactics. And the name of the game is Operation Unthinkable. That was a code name for a plan that potentially Churchill originated to attack the Soviets. In the case of this game, almost a month or two after the Germans had surrendered. So, going to be in this video spending some time. We'll look at the components. I'm leveraging the VASSAL mod that's on the Decision Games website. I've already done a open the box, or whatever you'd say, take out of the Ziploc in a previous recording for the actual game and the strategy and tactics issue. But now we're going to spend some time going over the rules and looking at the map. Right now, my queue for playing games, I think this one is the next one, so we'll see. But at least we'll go through the rules, and hopefully that'll set us up for here shortly starting a playthrough of it. I will point out something interesting. The designer, March, April, that is new. Interesting art here. IL-2 Sturmovix, flavor of a KV. This kind of looks like a precursor to the T-55. And then something bigger, or maybe a JS, and then we got Sturmovix in the air. So, Ty Bomba, here we go, is a designer. Interestingly enough, if you are familiar with Hollandspiel, they came out with a similarly titled game, not exactly, back about 4 or 5 years ago, and the designer was Ty Bomba. I was just doing some quick comparisons here between the two, and we'll see later that, yeah, this game is at a higher scale. If you look at the counters, the, I don't know what we call them, the Allies versus the Soviets, I guess. The Allies are corps-sized, and the Soviets are army-sized, and the map is not as detailed, or I would say the map scale is bigger. I don't know if it mentions in the house the hexes or anything like that, hex size. Yeah, 13 clicks here, 1 week. We'll keep that core. Army, 192 units. And when I do look at the counters, there are what I believe to be nuclear explosions here. I do have the PNP version of this game. I just haven't pulled it out. So it's entirely possible the game here is a progression coming from this game that Ty Bomba did previously. So maybe a later time we'll look at that. I'll keep this up though when we compare scales. But they're both covering the Allies, well, similarly Churchill's plan, or maybe there should be a picture of Patton here. Patton's dream, which was a recent topic of No Enemies Here and Aardwolf. So I thought it was appropriate then to go ahead and get this in the queue. So let's see, just moving down here, and I've done some of my highlighting. This is the rules. 5 miles. Okay, there we go. That which is different than his other game, which is 13 kilometers versus 8 kilometers. So not quite half, but close enough. Soviets are corps and corps equivalents. And in the other game it was armies for the Soviets. And for the Western Allies it was division in this game, which in the other game it was corps. So we can see the scale has come down some here. Oh, and here's an assumption. There's 2 communist Polish armies fighting with the Soviets, just like the Western Allies had their Polish units, and they're making the assumption those who were not ardent communists and those who were worried about their families in Poland would have already deserted. So we're assuming these troops, there's not going to apparently be a walking off the field rule for these troops, or defection rule. That's what I wanted to say. The game map, I showed it to you in the open the ziploc here, but it's 22 by 34, 228 counters, and it's just a slice of Germany here. And they've got it over on its side. This is, of course, the Western Allies side. This is the Soviet side. And actually, we can look at it. We can see Berlin is rather large here. Potsdam. We'll see later there's variable front lines potentially, but here's the Elbe. And this is where the Allies stopped the Western Allies stopped their advance. So we do see Leipzig back here, Dresden, we see Berlin. Interesting orientation. North isn't actually pointed at one edge. You can see here it's kind of diagonal. Swing this up, but I think we can, make the adjustment here. And this is supposed to be the front line right here, this yellow line, and then it drops off here during the Elbe. But there's even some options there to have it back here at the Mulda. We'll see there's a role for that, and it looks like that's why there's a yellow line here. So depending on the role, one of these will be the front lines, right? It's a nice map, not too, not too gaudy, I guess I'd say. And we do see waterways, forests, and cities. No real mountains or rough. So, but a lot of forests, and then we've got the Autobahn here that aids in movement. So let's pull the rules back up, work our way through it here. Coming down here, movement factors chart. Okay, there's an error, we'll deal with that later. We clearly know the map edges. It does go in to explain hex control. Yeah, just exerting a ZOC into an enemy controlled hex doesn't give you control. Control passes when you have a ground unit, then it can continually change. And there are control markers for those critical hexes, so you can mark it. And at the beginning of the game, obviously the Soviets control everything to the east of the front line. We saw the Allies to the west. Alright, first thing is counters, and these aren't quite traditional. You would think combat factor movement, but no. What he did here is it's attack factor, defense factor, and then the usual information here about the unit and the size, etc. We'll see, depending on the type of the unit, mechanized, non-mechanized, they're going to have and then the Allied Airborne Corps, they're going to have preset movement factors, which we'll see here in the rules, and they're on the board, etc. And then when we look at the counters, we've got Guards Cavalry, and then mechanized, non-mechanized. The Soviets actually have non-mechanized, and in the Communist Polish, these cavalry units and armored cav units, they've got a special recon feature they can do, or screening feature, that actually helps Allied units move. The Allies don't have any non-mechanized units, but they do have a special case, the Airborne Corps. There's two of them. I believe it's the 1st and the 18th. So, but that's what the coloring is. But the key thing is attack factor, defense factor with preset movement factor depending on what type of unit you are. Explanation of unit sizes, abbreviations you may see on the counters. Unit types, nothing real. I mean, this is a bit unique. That's the 79th, I believe, British division. They can do some, when it comes to waterways, rivers, lakes, they can assist in unique ways. Motorized infantry or motorized or mechanized, they did it this way. Combined arms, mechanized, armored cav makes sense, airborne, rifle. Mechanized artillery versus non-mechanized. So different types of units here. We got the attack factor, defense factor, and here we go. Here's the first one that defines the movement factors. Mechanized units have 12. Non-mech, and only Soviets have non-mech, have 8. And you can see the non-mech will basically be your standard infantry symbol here, or your artillery without the wheels underneath it. And then the Allied Airborne Corps is a special case. There's 2 of them, a movement of 4. And then we come to see that Units can be two-step, they can be one-step. To be honest, let me go ahead and show this here. Make this a little bigger. We'll just pull it down to 4th Armored. That's interesting. And we'll do Soviet mech. We'll get a big unit here. See if they got any tank cores. Yeah, here's a tank core. It's a 9-9. Do they have any bigger units? Nope. So we'll just go with this unit. It doesn't matter. There's an interesting point right off of the bat. The Western Allied units can do a step loss. No, one step only for Soviet units. So that's a big gain here, and you see, of course, the strength difference too. So Western Allied units are pretty much a bit more powerful in the combat factors, and they have 2 steps normally, and then Soviet units don't have 2 steps. So that's a big difference right there. The 1st Allied Airborne, 18th Airborne Corps has 4 steps, only one of which is play. The Allies do have those. They're unique units. Here they are. That's a pretty big unit. And then here's 2 corps, 1st Airborne and 18th Airborne. And we'll see paradrop rules later for them. And they just say rotate in the 2nd unit, straightforward. Initially at the beginning, all Allied units begin play on the map, except for the Airborne Corps, which is off, the 2 Airborne Corps, which are off board, probably at an air base. Soviet Union, some of their units have the letter R in the top right. Let's see if I can do this split screen now. I can't give you an example. This is, let's see, Soviet Guards Cavalry, there's Polish units, Soviet Mechanized. Let's see if we can find one of them. See the color change, those are the cavalry type units that can do this recon screening we'll see in a second. Well, there's an R. Okay, so a number of the units have an R in the top left, and they'll be kept off board in a cup or a virtual cup and drawn randomly. We'll see there's a process to bring them on board. Yeah, no game turn marker. That's nice. Well, there is. We can have one here. This is an Allied control marker, and then each of the Western Allies, the US and the UK, have a heavy bomber marker, which can potentially perform carbon bombing. So the setup, we'll see all the Allied units are on the board, but they're divided by Army group. There's a British Army group, and then there's a US Army group. And there's got to be a hard line between them, and they can't cross over and work together. So that's an interesting dynamic. Airborne Corps is off board. The Soviet player can set up all units, and the R units go in a cup, they say. Here's the first variable. When you start the game, 2 possible frontline situations. The Elbe River, or by this time, to meet the criteria of the agreement, the Allies had already started withdrawing, so potentially they could be on the Mulde River line. All right, and I think we did see that before. I can show it to you. Maybe I should zoom out. Yeah, here's a split. Well, let's see. There we go. See how we got 2 separate setup lines here, and this is the Mulde River. So depending on what you roll, the Western Allies will set up here, or they will be back here and set up here. Okay. So that does give some variableness to the game, I guess, between plays, potentially, and it's a 50-50 shot. Then the Allied player has to define the Army group boundary between the U.S. Army group in the south and the UK Army group in the north. All right. And here are your choices along a south-northeast hex file, or I don't know how they're saying, either like this, or zigzagging. That'll be an interesting decision, I guess, looking at the whole board to figure out where I want to define that line. because then it does say, when you define that line, U.S. units that are operating in the south can actually move onto that line and attack into that line. UK units or UK Army Group units, you see they're made up of even Germans, can't move into the line. So the line serves as a hard line, and the US can operate on the line. The UK Army Group can't operate on the line, which kind of makes sense. And then again, there's your variableness. You can switch that between games and see what they want to do. Oh, this is interesting though. The Allied player may change the boundary at the start of each. So in other words, we can have some horse trading between the two army groups. Move the line, okay? If one or more units are on the wrong side, if not adjacent to a Soviet unit, the Allied unit may not move adjacent to a Soviet unit until they get on the right side of the line. If adjacent, this must move away, most direct route possible, and then cross the line. So, if for whatever reason the Allied player wants to shift that line, they can do that at the beginning of each turn. And again, here we go. The Soviet setup, they have to side up on their side of the line. No requirement to cover every hex. They can set up however they want. Pair of optional rules. They can set them up upside down, hidden, and then the Allied player sets up, and then they can flip them over. So a little bit of, Allies guessing how they're set up, the Western Allies. Another rule is potentially Stalin gets wind through his spy network. So everybody goes in defense. All R units are on the east map edge. So they immediately, all of the reinforcements come in right away because Stalin caught wind of the attack. Both of those are optional rules. Allied setup, each side sets up on their appropriate side, and they don't have to cover every hex of the front, except for the Airborne Corps, which is off. Interesting rule here, Soviet Maskarovka. I probably didn't pronounce that right. It was 4 to 6. Then the Soviet player in 4 to 6 means, the Allies had pulled back to the Mulda River, so they weren't in contact necessarily. So the Soviet player rolls 3d6, and after the Allies have set up, now the Soviets can move that number of units around in response to the Allied setup. If it's still on the Elba, which meaning they made contact, that's what this one is, then only 2d6 of units again. So again, variableness between the games here. Moving on to how to win. The Soviet player gets a sudden death victory anytime beginning with game turn 4 if they can exit 20 or more units off the west edge. And that's it. Game over. Done. Okay. Kind of Operational Unthinkable went bad fast. The Soviets were able to pull off overrunning part of Germany. There is no Allied Western Ally sudden victory. Game turn ends at 8. There's an optional rule to go to 10 turns if you want. Allied victory exits 5 units off the east map edge, wins the game. All units must exit the map within 5 hexes of any other unit that exits the map, so it's got to be a cohesive force. Must be able to trace supply to each of the qualifying hexes. In this case, Airborne Units 2. The Allied Army Group boundary has no bearing. As long as they're within 5, it could be 2 or 3 from the UK and 2 or 3 from the US. And that's play is determined at the end of game turn 8. So it sounds like if they get 5 units off early, then the Soviets can focus on cutting the supply lines. Okay, and that's it. If they don't get the 5 units off by these requirements, Soviet player wins. Unless the Soviet player totally turns the tide and gets 20 or more units off the west edge. So, moving on to the sequence of play, here's another, I wouldn't say unique, but another variable from the standard game we were used to. Each side can choose if they want to start their turn. Here's the Allied Airborne entry phase. They can land their airborne corps. That phase doesn't go on once they've both been landed. There's no pulling them off and reusing them in the scope of this game. But then each side chooses when it starts their turn, do they want to do movement first and then combat, or combat first and then movement and exploit, and the Soviets get the same choice. And then at the end we get the Soviet reinforcement phase. We'll see there's a process to roll die and see how many you get, and the Allied losses are potentially being recycled, replaced, and brought back on the turn. Okay. Allied Airborne entry phase may airdrop one or both units. Once both units have conducted the drop, there's no reason to do that anymore, at least in the sequence of play. Allied player declares if a drop will take place, and if one or both will drop. If the player declares a drop, player must place each deploying unit clear hex or Autobahn hex. Okay, and they can't move the turn they're dropped. If an Autobahn hex, don't have to worry about the other terrain. Airborne units, corps can fight on any side of the Army group line. It doesn't apply to them. They can't land on Soviet units, but they can land in Soviet zones of control. After deploying, may attack singly or in conjunction with any other unit. Yeah, we got that. Except we see, oh my goodness, German units coming over. They would be part of the UK, but they operate totally independently of both army groups. But they would stay in the UK area. Okay. In supply, concentric shifts. All right. They don't suffer that. That's nice. If you surround them, that doesn't bother them. Sounds like a line out of Band of Brothers when they said we're paratroopers or airborne. We're used to being surrounded. And when defending, convert a DR to a bloodbath. Ouch. We'll see that later. But if you lose them, they don't come back. Okay. There's our move, fight, fight, move. They talk about this. Sequence to start of phase 2. Yeah, we've got that. May 2. No penalties, no nothing. You can just do that. Let's talk about reinforcements. Game turns 1 through 7. You roll a die for the Soviets. So your player rolls 1d6 and modifies, adds the current game turn number. So as the game progresses, it ensures the reinforcements come in faster. And add 1 to the result if the front line was the Elbe River. Nice. Okay. That's the number of Soviet receives and draws blindly from that pool of units with an R, that many. Okay. Places all drawn units during the reinforcement phase. Got to place them all. East map edge hex. Okay. And remember the reinforcements occurs after the movement combat, so they're not going to move until next turn. Stacking limits we'll talk about. Yep. Allied recycling. Recycling eliminated Allied units. That's what that's for. Okay. Allied units may reorganize and re-enter play. But Soviet units and these units of the Allies cannot, Western Allies cannot recycle. Units of any type eliminated while out of supply. Airborne corps and the Polish corps. Okay. When recycled, two-step units come in as one step. So if you can eliminate units while out of supply, they are out of the game for the Allies if the Soviets can do that. And let's see, places all the eliminated recycle eligible units to the side of the map. And then conducts this and basically one at a time rolls the die, 1d6 plus 1 if it's UK because I guess they have less troops. And that's how many turns in the future they appear. Put them on the turn track. And of course, if they roll greater than, if the result is greater than 8, or if you're playing to 10, then those units are gone. And again, they appear on the west map edge. Okay. Stacking. Now this is important. It applies at all times. So you can't move through a fully stacked hex. Okay. Stacking applies at all times. And that's key. Okay, airborne stacking. This is a reminder, yeah, you can create traffic jams. And if for some reason we find probably combat due to retreat or something overstacked, then the owning player can eliminate enough units. And the stacking limit is basically 2.5. 2 divisions plus there's brigades and regiments which count as half, so you can get 2.5 that way. The 1st and 18th Airborne Corps cannot stack with any other unit, including each other. Good to know. German units may only stack and attack in conjunction with other German units. Okay. And, wow, UK, Polish, and German units may never end a movement phase adjacent to each other. Okay. And here, 2.5. Now we're talking about Corps with Soviets, because that's their equivalent. 2 Polish Communist armies count as 1 corps. Each Guards Cavalry Corps counts as a half corps. Soviet Artillery Corps counts as 2.5 corps. Thus, those units may never stack. We'll see them. They're 18 ones. So Soviet Artillery Corps can't stack, and they're pretty powerful. Standard zone of control, 6 hexes surrounding. Yeah, that's fine. I understand that. 6 hexes. Don't extend across all lake. Enemy units must stop when entering a ZOC. Okay, an enemy ZOC. Friendly EZOC does not negate that. Pretty traditional. This is a bit unique. You can move from EZOC to EZOC, enemy zone of control to enemy zone of control directly. A lot of games you have to leave it and come back. This one you can, but then you're done. So, for example, this guy can go here, or he could go here. Now he can't keep going. If he really wanted to go there, then he'd have to do something like this, go around. But you can move directly from one enemy ZOC to another. So that's a slight difference here. Presence of a friendly unit negates the effect of an enemy ZOC for retreat. That's good to know. We got to find out just with supply now. You can advance after combat. Supply is determined at the moment of movement and remains for the rest of the movement phase. Supply for combat is done at the moment of combat. Good to know. And it's pretty simple. Just trace a supply line of any length, not blocked, to the respective map edge. Can't go through enemy occupied hexes. May trace supply into, but not through. Common sense. And here we go. This is the key we want. Friendly unit negates enemy zone of control. So friendly units do negate both for supply and retreat, but not for movement, unlike another game I'm playing through right now. Allied West Edge, Western Allies, Soviet is East Edge, out of supply. There's no elimination from being out of supply, but if you are eliminated while out of supply, at least for the Western Allies, you're out of the game. If it starts out of supply at its move, it's half movement factor. Okay. Combat, if you're attacking, have the combat strength. Round up. Defending, it doesn't affect you. So you defend at full strength. That's Allied units. Let's see, let's skip the Artillery Corps. Soviet units have the combat strength of all attacking units, round up. Have the combat strength of all defending units, round up. So there's a difference. Out of supply Allied units defend at full strength. Soviet units at half. Okay. Artillery Corps, they defend normally against adjacent attacks. However, they must use their defensive factor when supporting a defense. Now, it kind of weakens them. They're 18-1, so if they're out of supply, they can only assist with the 1. Movement, pretty standard through here. This is important. No minimum movement. That means I can't always move 1 hex if it exceeds my movement factor. Don't know how often you'll see that situation, but that's important to note. Okay. Yeah, and you take your hand off, you're moved. Can move together as stacks, drop off people, etc. Terrain, autobahns act as roads. So you can take that as long as you're moving contiguously. Use the most highest MP cost terrain and the best for the defender. So if we looked at this, we'd see, we'll look at the terrain effects charts over here, but the Soviet Union is in a forest, which gives them a 1L shift we'll see later, But then we also see attacking across river is a standard half the attack factor. So this would be a 12 to 7, which would probably be a 1 to 1, but shifted 1 down for the forest. Maybe not a smart attack. This is a bit unique. That's the units that have the white on both sides, movement and combat. It's called cavalry scouting, units that move as a stack with one of the above types of units, like this. Pays the movement point cost for hex side and hex terrain as if they were armored cavalry and guards cavalry. So when we look at the terrain effects, we'll see that they have better movement, so anybody stacked with them will move. So that's an interesting addition. Here they go through the terrain for movement. Again, we're seeing the non-mech guard cav and armored cav. See how they've got the lower movement point cost. So all other units normally will pay 2 for forest, 3 for marsh. But if they've got these cavalry screening units, it helps them get through that faster. So that's a bit new. River hex sides, again, they can cross with only +1. All other units +2, except for the funnies. I forgot the guy's name, the British general. 79th Armored Division may cross river hex sides at no additional MP, and if units are stacked with it, they gain that benefit. And the 79th Armored can cross all lake hex sides at no additional MP, and units stacked with them can go with that. And that's as the designer's note about that here. They've got all sorts of amphibious transport. So that's an interesting unit along with the cavalry recon effect. Cities are 1 MP. Autobahns are 1/2 if you're moving along it. Autobahns do not negate river crossing costs, so that's interesting. Probably all the bridges are blown up. Units may not attack across lake hex sides unless the funnies are with them, the 79th. Allied 1st Airborne can combine with units from any army group except the Germans. So any Germans that are assisting the UK Army Group are totally on their own and need to stay away from the Poles. Combat is voluntary. Bingo. That's a key one. So I can attack who I want with what I want, and there's really no requirement, no mandatory to combat. Okay. Pretty much straightforward. And if you end up retreating on a axis, later attacked, you don't contribute to the defense, but you get the results. Pretty standard. Can't attack more than 1 hex. Usually you see that in mandatory combat when they say you got to attack all enemy units you're adjacent to. It doesn't apply here. You can only attack 1 hex. Single unit. Don't all have to participate. Pretty straightforward through there. Okay. Getting close here. Soviet artillery. Look at that attack factor. Awesome. In supply, artillery units may attack adjacent enemy units normally. And remember, though, they have to stack by themselves. So hopefully Soviet player doesn't want that unit adjacent to Allied units. That would be a big target in my mind with a defense of 1. But they may also participate in an attack or defense into hexes up to 3 hexes away. So they have a 3 hex range. There is no line of sight, we're going to see later. Supporting an attack or defense, not adjacent. If you are. Defensive factor is only used when defending against adjacent attacks. Terrain does not block artillery fire. Soviet artillery can support both Soviet attacks and defenses in the same game turn. Okay, so during the Western Allied phase, they can add their defense factor, I think, 3 hexes away. Their defense factor is only used when defending against adjacent attacks, so it's always 18. This is a powerful unit. Okay. There is no bombardment. That's what this is saying. It's got to be assisting an attack by at least 1 regular ground non-artillery unit. No limit to the number of artillery. Holy smoke. Okay, that's a lot. So if a player adds each artillery unit's attack, defense, combat factor to the total combat factors. Do not suffer the results of combat if they're non-adjacent, right? So that's a powerful unit. So combat procedure, are you in supply? And then you apply any halving due to being out of supply. If it applies, that's only the Soviets. And halving if attacking across a river, etc. Those waterways don't affect 79th and anybody stacked with them. And then you do a division, round down, less than the defender, round up. Interesting twist there. I don't know why you do a low odds attack. And then we go to the combat results table, and I'll just bring that over real quick here. German and US, Soviet and UK. Wow. So German and US and Polish, I believe that's the Polish Second Corps. Yeah, but if they're attacking with other UK units, if they're attacking by themselves, this appears to be the better column here, based on the fact that, yeah, it is the better column. So for whatever reason, Soviet and UK units aren't as good. By this point in the war, I think the UK units are running out of, well, both the Soviets and the UK were running out of replacements, reinforcements. So you pick your column there, and then AAA, the Airborne Corps, they get some advantages. Well, no, not advantages. If they're attacking or defending at least one Soviet tank or mech unit, no other Allied units, then they get detriment. One left shift if attacking, one right shift if defending, meaning airborne troops aren't good on their own against tanks. Forest 1L, cities 2L, surrounded attacks 1R. You get the idea. Yep. Except for airborne units or in a city. So even if you surround a city, lay siege, you don't get the concentric attack shift. Carpet bombing, we're going to see it's a two-edged sword. Each marker may only support one attack per allied combat phase. So these are available each turn. One for the UK and one for the US. Okay, and they do give you the limitations, how they can support each other. And for each time they use it, you roll 1d6 and have the result rounding down. So you can get a 0 with a 1. So what's that saying is if you roll a 1, no, and then you half it to a half and round it down, oops, they hit the attacking units. If you roll a 2, you get a 1 and no effect, it just misses. And then if you get higher, you shift that many to the right. That's pretty nice. So if you roll a 6, you get 3R. If you roll a 5, you get 2R. If you roll a 4, you get 2R. If you roll a 3, there's no effect. So it's kind of a 50-50 shot for a positive effect. Here's the rule where if you go over 6 to 1, 7 to 1, the defender automatically gets a DE. If the odds are less than 1 to 3, 1 to 2, the attacker automatically receives an AL1. Otherwise, roll a die. So this is not one where it says it stays the same. It says, yeah, and you've got that on the combat table to remind you. That is a different thing too. A lot of will say if it's less than 1 to 3, you either can't attack or you leave it. Greater than, it's either, usually you just use that column. So this one is different. If you exceed, it's a DE result, and if you go under, it's an AL1. And here are the combat results. DE, remove all one-step units to the dead pile, and then reduce all two-step units 1 step, so it's not really a true total defender eliminated. And the units don't have to retreat, so that's different. Bloodbath is also interesting. Both sides lose 1 step, and then the attacking player can keep escalated. The attacker can then say, I'm going to lose another step, which forces, this sounds like the dark summer, dark whatever system here, somewhat. The defending player then can eliminate 1 friendly step or retreat. So the attacker can up the ante and force him to retreat. And this can keep going and going. Attacker loses 1 step here, but doesn't retreat. And DR, the defender must retreat 1 hex towards a supply source. Cannot retreat in any occupied hexes. I think if you retreat into a if a stacker unit retreats into an enemy ZOC not occupied, it loses 1 step also. Except for these cav units and guards, whatever, may retreat into an enemy ZOC without penalty. Units stacked with them also exempt. And if there's an overstack, the owning player may retreat individual units to different hexes to avoid creating overstacks. And advance after combat, pretty straightforward here. Yep, that's it. And ironically, that's the end of the rules. So hopefully that gives you an idea for the game. I've gone through this a few times. I know I'm going to have to go back and refer. But at this point, the next step will be the setup and actually looking at the beginning here. When I do actually start the game, 2 things have to happen before units even set up. Got a roll to determine where the actual front line is. A little variableness here as the Western Allies began their withdrawal to the East German, West German borders, or are they still on the Elbe? And then the Western Allies have to decide what's the division or boundary line between the 2 army groups. Okay. And then real quick, yeah, if this happens, well, the Western Allies have really messed up. 20 units off the west edge, that's, yeah. We'll see if that's possible. But what really has to happen is the Western Allies need to drive across the board and get 5 units within 5 hexes of any other unit off of the east map edge and in supply. So they have to remain in supply. So let me zoom this out. Well, I'm going to have to do it this way. Let's see. Yeah, so the Allies' goal is to get off this edge of the map. I mean, that's it. You got 8 turns to get 5 units off the edge of the map. That's the bottom line. Honestly, if the Soviets are running units off this edge, the west edge, it doesn't look like they. Well, I guess you could get a case where the Soviets broke through here and they got maybe 10 off, but the Western Allies broke through here and they got 5 off, and in that case, the Western Allies would win. So, just doing a little brief review here. Why would I want to fight through Berlin? And then you got these forests they're going to channel. So, and it looks like the U.S. starts, depending on the starting line, this is a little clearer, but you have to deal with Dresden. This is all woods through here. This is Berlin. I mean, here's another possible path here. So it'll be interesting how it plays out. You know, after listening to, I think it was Brian Hull, I think it was on Ardwolf and No Enemies Here, or it was No Enemies Here with Ardwolf. The Soviets were at wit's end by the end of 45. They had reached the bottom of the barrel for replacements, troops, supplies. UK was pretty much there too. So I guess this is a possibility. So couldn't have entitled this Patton's Dream because the first turn I believe is July, and I cannot believe I thought the war ended in April. So it gave them a few months. This was before, I believe, the atomic bombs were dropped on Japan. So at least in this game, there is no atomic bomb element either. So basically 8 turns to drive into Poland, actually. And I did read some rationale here that potentially rationales once they get into Poland and free Poland, then Stalin would be concerned about an invasion of Russia proper, or you know, the border, whatever they've taken, obviously the provinces, etc., and would then sue for peace. So we'll see, but it does boil down for the Allies. Get 5 units within 5 hexes in supply off the map edge at the 8th turn. Okay. All right, so hopefully this was helpful, this discussion. If you're wondering about this game, and like I said, I hope to start up a playthrough here in the next week, so watch for the setup maybe, and maybe some of the first turn. And then we'll see if Patton's dream actually comes true. All right, thanks for listening, and see you at the next one.